I walked into my room. Lydia was with a man. My heart stopped. I used to trust him, but he betrayed me. Isaac Manor had always been a quiet man, unassuming, intelligent, and dependable. At 40, he was a self-taught software engineer, the kind of person who built his career from the ground up. He had a knack for solving complex problems, and his work had earned him respect from his peers and admiration from his family. Isaac's home, nestled on the edge of a small suburban neighborhood, reflected the life he had worked so hard to build. It was a comfortable place, with a sprawling garden and a study overlooking a forest, where he could retreat and work in peace. He had a beautiful wife, Lydia, and a young daughter, Tommy, who was the apple of his eye. Life had always seemed perfect for Isaac until that day. It started with a normal afternoon. Isaac had just returned home from his job, where he had been busy finalizing the city's traffic light upgrade project, a project that had taken months to develop. As he pulled into the driveway, he noticed an unfamiliar car parked near the front door. His heart skipped a beat, but he thought nothing of it. It was only when he stepped inside, hearing muffled voices and something he couldn't quite place, moans, that his gut twisted. His stomach churned, and for a brief moment, his feet seemed frozen in place. His worst fears came crashing down as he walked toward the bedroom door. There, in plain sight, was Lydia, his wife, straddling a man. The man was none other than Sheriff Peter Ramsey, the same man who had been a constant fixture in their lives, always offering help and advice. Isaac's breath hitched as the realization hit him. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was physical and right under his nose. Isaac stood at the door, speechless for a moment, watching the scene unfold in a sickening, disbelieving haze. He had trusted Lydia. They had been married for 18 years, and for the majority of that time, he had never suspected a thing. The sheriff looked up, catching Isaac's eye, a mocking smirk creeping across his face. "Oh, Isaac," Peter said coolly. "I was just helping your wife with a little something." Lydia, her face pale and red from embarrassment, scrambled to cover herself, but it was too late. "Isaac, can we talk about this like adults?" she asked, her voice trembling. Isaac's anger bubbled over. "Adults?" Isaac shouted, his voice shaking with rage. "You've been sleeping with him, and you've had the nerve to pretend it's nothing. What the hell, Lydia?" She stood there, face flushed, as Peter walked out, completely unfazed, patting Isaac on the back with a mock sympathy that made Isaac's blood boil. "You'll be fine, buddy. It's just a little family drama, right?" Peter said, as if this was some sort of game. As Peter closed the door behind him, Lydia spoke again, but her words were more of a threat than an apology. "You're crazy if you think you can take anything from me. If you leave, you'll never see Tommy again. I'll make sure of it." Isaac stood still, shaking with rage and disbelief. The last person he would ever have suspected of betraying him was his own wife. But there it was, laid bare in front of him. "I'll leave, Lydia," Isaac spat, his voice icy, "and I'll never come back. This will never happen again." He stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him, and made his way to his car. His hands gripped the steering wheel as he tried to steady his breathing. He had to think, to act. Isaac was a man of logic, not of emotion, but this betrayal was too much to handle. As he drove away, he called his lawyer, Ben Green, his oldest friend. Ben had always been the level-headed one, the one who could see things clearly when Isaac's emotions clouded his judgment. Isaac didn't care about the details right now. All he knew was that he couldn't stay here, not after what he had seen. "Ben," Isaac said, his voice ragged, "I need help. Lydia's been cheating, and it's not just that. There's more. I think she's trying to take everything from me." Ben was silent for a moment before he responded, his voice low. "Isaac, we need to do something about this. She's got connections, and if she's in bed with Ramsey, things could get ugly." "I'm not backing down, Ben," Isaac replied, his voice firm despite the anger swirling in his chest. "I want a divorce. I'm done." The next morning, Ben arrived at Isaac's house, the two of them sitting over strong coffee as Isaac outlined the betrayal and the threats Lydia had made. Ben's face darkened with concern as he listened. "This is bad," he said after a long pause. "If Peter Ramsey is involved, this could get worse than you think. We need to protect you legally and financially." But before they could discuss further, the door burst open. 5 officers flooded the room, guns drawn. "I'm Isaac Manor," Isaac said, raising his hands in confusion. "What's going on?" One officer stepped forward, his face grim. "You're under arrest for assault," he said. "Assault?" Isaac repeated, his heart pounding in disbelief. "I haven't even seen my daughter since yesterday morning. This is insane." They didn't listen. As the officers dragged him out of the house, Ben rushed to intervene, demanding to know what was going on. "Where are you taking him?" Ben shouted. "What's the charge?" "2nd Street," the officer replied coldly. Isaac was shoved into a patrol car, his mind racing. He hadn't done anything. There was no reason for this, no evidence, no reason to believe he had hurt anyone. But as the car sped through the streets, Isaac realized what had happened. Ramsey had framed him, and now his life was about to come crashing down. Isaac sat in the cold, dimly lit holding cell, his head pounding from the chaos that had erupted in the last 24 hours. His mind kept replaying the scene he had walked in on the previous night. Lydia, his wife of 18 years, in the arms of another man. Peter Ramsey, the man he had trusted, the man who had been like a mentor to him. How could this be happening? And why? The jail was like a labyrinth, narrow hallways, the faint scent of despair in the air, and the dull murmur of voices echoing from the cells. Isaac couldn't focus. The officers had shoved him into a cell without explanation, treating him like a criminal when he had done nothing wrong. The anger and frustration that surged through him were suffocating, but there was no time to wallow in them. He needed to think. He needed to figure out how to get out of this nightmare. Hours later, a familiar face appeared at the door. Ben Green, his lawyer and best friend, walked in with a grim look on his face. The moment Ben sat down, Isaac could tell the news wasn't good. "They've got you on fabricated evidence, Isaac," Ben said, running a hand through his hair. "Lydia and Tommy have both given statements accusing you of assault. But I know you, and I know you didn't do this. It's Ramsey, Isaac. He's behind all of this." Isaac leaned back against the cold wall, letting the words sink in. He had expected this, but hearing it out loud made it all the more real. Peter Ramsey, the man who had wormed his way into his family, had now turned the tables completely. He wasn't just trying to destroy Isaac's marriage. He was trying to destroy his entire life. "They're going to send me down, Ben. I know it," Isaac muttered, his voice heavy with disbelief. "I don't have an alibi. They've got the testimony, they've got the photos. It's over." Ben slammed his fist on the table, his frustration palpable. "No, Isaac. We're not going down without a fight. I'm going to expose everything. Starting with the corruption, the framing, everything." Isaac's gaze darkened. "I don't care about my reputation anymore. I care about getting out of this hellhole." The next few days were a blur. Isaac's trial moved quickly, and the prosecution wasted no time in painting him as the villain. Lydia's tearful testimony, along with Tommy's reluctant statement, painted Isaac as an abusive father and husband. The courtroom was filled with fake sympathy and false accusations, and Isaac's own words were twisted beyond recognition. The fabricated evidence, pictures of bruises that never existed, was enough to tip the scales. Isaac's heart ached as he watched his daughter, the only person he had ever truly cared about, sit in the stands, her face devoid of emotion. He hadn't spoken to her since the night he had walked in on Lydia and Ramsey. His heart broke every time he thought of Tommy, and now she was testifying against him. "I didn't do it, Tommy," Isaac whispered under his breath, though he knew she couldn't hear him. But despite the lies and manipulation, Isaac held firm. He would not back down. He knew the truth, he knew his integrity. And as the trial dragged on, his resolve only grew stronger. Ben was working behind the scenes, digging into Ramsey's life, hoping to uncover a crack in the corruption. But Isaac knew time was running out. The verdict was looming, and all the pieces seemed stacked against him. The day of the verdict arrived, and the tension in the courtroom was unbearable. Isaac could feel the weight of the stares from the jury, the sharp glances of the prosecutor, and the cold indifference of the judge. It felt like the walls were closing in on him, suffocating him with every passing second. The judge read the verdict with a cold, emotionless tone. Guilty of assault, 5.5 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 3 years. Isaac's chest tightened as the words hit him like a punch to the gut. He couldn't believe it. The world around him blurred as the judge continued, but Isaac barely registered the rest of the details. He had been sentenced. His life was over. Lydia's face, pale and devoid of emotion, flashed in front of him. She didn't care. She had won. And Peter Ramsey, Isaac's former mentor, his supposed friend, was sitting in the back of the courtroom, smirking as if this was all part of a sick, twisted game. The gavel struck, and the room went silent. Isaac's mind was a storm of confusion, pain, and rage. He had been betrayed by the one person he had trusted most, and now he was being punished for it. As the guards led him away, Isaac caught one last glimpse of his daughter, Tommy. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with sorrow and confusion. He wanted to reach out to tell her the truth, but it was too late. She was lost to him now, just like everything else. The clang of the prison doors echoed through Isaac's mind like a death knell. He was no longer the respected software engineer, the family man with a bright future. He was now just another inmate in a system designed to break people. His hands trembled as the guards shoved him into his cell, the cold, sterile walls pressing in on him from all sides. This was his new reality. But Isaac wasn't the kind of man to just sit back and let life steamroll him. No, Isaac had always been a survivor. And in this concrete tomb, he would find a way to survive. The first few weeks in prison were the hardest. The violence, the filth, the constant fear. Isaac had never been exposed to anything like this before, but he kept his head down, observing, learning. He had no choice but to adapt. Isaac's first few days were filled with confusion and frustration. He was thrust into a world where the rules were different, where loyalty was bought with blood and respect was earned through fear. But Isaac was not a man to back down. He had always been the smart one, the one who could think his way out of any situation. Now, he just needed to survive long enough to turn things around. In his first month, Isaac learned quickly that the prison's hierarchy was controlled by one man, Katos, the largest, most feared inmate in the facility. Katos wasn't just a bully. He was a criminal mastermind, pulling the strings behind the scenes. Isaac wasn't afraid of him. He was afraid of the system that allowed men like Katos to thrive. But Isaac saw something in Katos that no one else did, a potential for change. Katos had a story, one filled with hardship and loss. And Isaac, ever the observer, saw an opportunity to reach him. One night, Isaac found himself sitting across from Cato's in the mess hall. The giant man was hunched over a piece of paper, scribbling something with a pencil. Isaac, ever the curious one, couldn't help but ask, "What are you writing?" Isaac asked, his voice low but friendly. Cato's glanced up, a sneer forming on his lips. "None of your business, nerd." Isaac chuckled softly, unfazed. "You know, I've always been good with words. I could help you make that look better if you want." Cato's shot him a sideways glance, sizing him up. "You think you can teach me to write?" Isaac smiled, unperturbed by Cato's intimidating presence. "Sure, if you want. What's the letter for?" Cato's hesitated for a moment, then sighed, his shoulders slumping. "It's for my grandmother. Her 87th birthday is coming up, and I want to write her a letter. But I never learned to write properly." Isaac's eyes softened. He had always been a teacher at heart, and this moment, this brief, fleeting moment, felt like the first chance he had to make a difference in this cold, harsh place. "I can help you with that," Isaac said, his voice sincere. The two men spent the next few hours talking. Isaac teaching Cato's how to write, how to read, how to express himself on paper. Isaac could see the change happening, slowly but surely. Cato's, for the first time in years, felt like someone cared. As the weeks passed, Isaac became known as Dr. Isaac among the inmates. Word spread about the man who could teach, who could help others see a different path, a way out of the life they had been forced into. And in return, Isaac gained respect. Not through violence, not through fear, but through knowledge. But prison wasn't just about survival, it was about strategy. Isaac knew that if he wanted to get out, he needed leverage. And he knew exactly where to find it. Isaac's prison cell, small and cramped, became his sanctuary. In the dead of night, while the other inmates slept, Isaac worked on something that would change everything. He was a man of systems, and he knew how to manipulate them. Using his skills, Isaac began to tap into the prison security systems, its cameras, its databases, everything. Over the next several months, Isaac grew stronger. Not just physically, thanks to the grueling training from Cato's, but mentally. He had a plan. He would expose the corruption that had put him here, and he would bring down Isaac. Wasn't just going to escape the prison. He was going to take down Sheriff Peter Ramsey and anyone who had helped frame him. But to do that, Isaac needed allies. And that's where Cato's came in. Cato's had transformed from a bully to a loyal friend. The two men had forged a bond, one that could not be easily broken. And as the months went on, they began to form a network of prisoners who were willing to follow Isaac's lead. They were the forgotten men, the ones society had written off. But Isaac knew they were capable of far more than anyone had given them credit for. One evening, as the sun began to set and the dim lights of the prison flickered on, Isaac sat with Cato's in the corner of the yard. The two men were talking quietly, planning their next move. "I've got it," Isaac said, a glint of determination in his eyes. "We're going to take down Ramsey, and we're going to do it from the inside." Cato's nodded, his face serious. "How do we do that, Isaac? How do we bring that bastard down?" Isaac leaned forward, his voice a low whisper. "We've got everything we need. I've got access to the security footage, and I've got the dirt on Ramsey. We'll send it to the right people outside the prison. Once they have what they need, they'll know exactly what to do." But Isaac wasn't just planning revenge. He was planning justice. And when the day came, when Ramsey would finally pay for what he had done, Isaac knew he would be ready. The man who had tried to destroy him would be exposed for what he truly was. A corrupt, dangerous man who had used his power to hurt others. Isaac Manor had spent months building a network, carefully and quietly assembling the pieces of his plan. His time in prison had not been wasted. While the others around him bided their time, Indulging in petty squabbles and low-level schemes, Isaac had worked, planned, and prepared for the moment when he would turn the tables. He had spent hours reviewing his old security footage, the footage from his home, and piecing together the details of Peter Ramsey's corruption. But even with all the evidence, getting it out of the prison was no small feat. The first part of the plan was simple: secure the evidence and send it out. Isaac had already taken steps to hack into the prison's internal communications system. His skills were unmatched, and he had found a way to bypass the system's security measures. It wasn't just the security cameras in the prison he was tapping into. He had discovered files and logs, some of which had been hidden for years. These files contained detailed records of Ramsey's illegal activities, including bribery, falsifying evidence, and even threats against prisoners to maintain control over them. Isaac's heart raced as he downloaded the files onto a flash drive. He knew that this evidence could be the key to his freedom and to destroying Peter Ramsey. But getting it out of the prison was the real challenge. Kato's had become Isaac's most trusted ally, and Isaac knew he had to rely on him now more than ever. Kato's, once the prison's most feared inmate, had undergone a transformation. He had learned to read and write, and now he was more than just a muscle-bound thug. He was a valuable ally. The two men made an unlikely pair, but Isaac trusted Kato's like no one else. One evening, as the guards did their rounds, Isaac handed Kato's the flash drive. "Get this to Ben Green," he said, his voice low and urgent. "He's the only one I trust on the outside. Tell him to send it to the FBI. This is our only shot." Kato's took the drive, with a nod, slipping it into his pocket. He didn't ask questions, he never did. He knew that Isaac had a plan, and he would follow him to the end. The night was silent as Kato's slipped through the shadows, moving with the quiet grace of a predator. He wasn't the same man who had first met Isaac all those months ago. Kato's had changed, and now he was ready to help Isaac take down the man who had wronged him. As Kato's left the prison gates and entered the darkness of the world outside, Isaac sat alone in his cell, his thoughts drifting to his daughter, Tommy. He had not seen her in over a year, and the pain of not being there for her ate at him every day. She had been torn between loyalty to her mother and the truth. Isaac had no doubt that Lydia had twisted her mind, convincing her that he was the villain. But he would not give up on her, not after everything they had been through. Meanwhile, on the outside, Ben Green had been working tirelessly to dig into the case. The corruption Isaac had uncovered was much deeper than they had realized. The flash drive had contained more than just Ramsey's involvement in Isaac's framing. It had uncovered a network of criminals, officials, and crooked cops, all of whom had been operating under the radar for years. Isaac had found the smoking gun, but now the real work was about to begin. Ben contacted the FBI with the information Isaac had provided. He worked with the agents to authenticate the files, sending them through secure channels to make sure the right people got the evidence. The clock was ticking, and everyone involved knew that Ramsey wouldn't go down without a fight. The pressure mounted as the evidence began to make its way through the legal system. Isaac's heart pounded as he waited for word, but it wasn't long before he got a call from Ben. "It's working, Isaac," Ben said, his voice shaky with excitement. "The FBI is on it. Ramsey is in trouble. They're moving fast, but you're not out of the woods yet. We need to keep pushing. This isn't over." Isaac smiled, a dark satisfaction flooding through him. He wasn't done. Not by a long shot. He had spent too long in this hellhole, too long fighting for his freedom to back down now. But as he sat there, thinking of his next move, Isaac heard something that made his blood run cold. The guards were coming. Isaac's heart leapt in his chest. He had been expecting this moment, but he had hoped it wouldn't come so soon. The prison's warden, a man named Frank, had always had a way of making his presence known. Isaac had suspected that Frank was in Ramsey's pocket, but until now, he had been careful not to draw too much attention to himself. That was about to change. The door to Isaac's cell clanged open, and 2 guards stepped inside, their faces unreadable. "Get up, Isaac," one of them barked. "Warden wants to see you." Isaac stood slowly, his mind racing. He had no idea what this was about, but he had a sinking feeling in his gut. This wasn't a routine check. This was something else. Isaac followed the guards down the narrow hallways, his footsteps echoing in the empty corridors. As they reached the warden's office, the door swung open, revealing Warden Frank, sitting behind his desk with a steely expression on his face. "You wanted to see me, sir?" Isaac asked, trying to remain calm, though his heart was beating faster than he would have liked. Warden Frank looked up from his paperwork, his gaze cold and calculating. "I've heard some things, Isaac, things that concern me." He paused for a moment, allowing the silence to stretch between them. "I'm not going to let you play me for a fool. I know what you're up to, and if you think you're getting away with it, you're wrong." Isaac stood still, his mind calculating his next move. He knew Frank was involved in Ramsey's scheme, but he hadn't expected him to be this bold. "What do you want, Warden?" Isaac asked, his voice calm but firm. He wasn't about to let this man intimidate him. "I want you to know that you've made a big mistake," Frank said, his voice low and menacing. "You're not getting out of here, Isaac. Not now, not ever. And if you keep pushing, I'll make sure you never see the light of day again." Isaac's blood ran cold, but he didn't flinch. "I'm not afraid of you, Frank, and I'm not afraid of Ramsey either. You're all going to fall. You just don't know it yet." Frank's face darkened. "You think you're some kind of hero, Isaac? You're nothing. Just a criminal like the rest of them." Isaac smiled, a slow, knowing smile. "I may be in prison, but I'm the one with the power now. You'll see." Isaac Manor stood before the courtroom once again, but this time he wasn't the man being judged. The weight of the past few years hung heavily on his shoulders, but the bitterness he once felt for the system, for the people who had betrayed him, had been replaced by something else, something stronger. Isaac had become a force, not just for his own redemption, but for the people he had come to care for during his time in prison. He had fought for his freedom, but now it was time for those who had wronged him to face justice. Peter Ramsey's smirk had long since disappeared. In his place, there was a man desperate, a man who had been cornered by the very system he had once controlled. The FBI had pieced together every shred of evidence Isaac had provided, the documents, the recordings, the testimonies from the corrupt officials who had helped cover Ramsey's tracks. And now, as the trial reached its climax, Ramsey could no longer hide. Isaac's heart beat steadily as the final witness took the stand. It was Lydia, his ex-wife, the woman who had once been his everything, but had now become a stranger. As she spoke, Isaac's mind drifted back to the moment he had walked in on her and Ramsey, the betrayal that had shattered his world. Lydia's face was pale, her eyes downcast. She spoke quietly, her voice barely audible as she recounted her version of events. But Isaac could see it, the guilt in her eyes, the weight of her own actions pressing down on her. She had never fully acknowledged the damage she had done, but now, under the scrutiny of the courtroom, she couldn't hide it. Her voice wavered as she admitted to everything. How she had lied to the authorities, how she had been manipulated by Ramsey, how she had betrayed Isaac. The courtroom was silent, the air thick with the tension of what was to come. The prosecutor, armed with the mountain of evidence Isaac had painstakingly gathered, turned to the judge. "Your Honor, we have presented irrefutable evidence of Sheriff Peter Ramsey's corruption and the deliberate framing of Isaac Manor. He is guilty of abuse of power, falsifying evidence, and a series of crimes that have destroyed an innocent man's life. Isaac stood tall, watching as the judge rendered his verdict. Peter Ramsey, you are hereby sentenced to life in prison for the crimes you have committed. Your actions have caused irreparable damage, and you will never walk free again. A wave of relief washed over Isaac as the gavel came down. Ramsey's face twisted in anger, but it didn't matter anymore. The system had caught up to him, and for the first time in years, Isaac felt free. But even as the courtroom erupted into murmurs, Isaac's thoughts were not on the victory, but on the people who had helped him get here. Ben Green, his loyal lawyer and friend, had been instrumental in securing the evidence. Cato's, his prison ally, had risked everything to help Isaac bring down the corrupt system from within. And Tommy, his daughter, the one person he had feared he would never see again, had shown up in the most unexpected way. As the case against Ramsey closed, the doors of the courtroom opened, and Isaac stepped into the world once again. The harsh prison walls had fallen away, replaced by the possibility of a new life. And then there she was, Tommy. The moment their eyes met, everything fell away. The years of pain, the silence, the broken promises, they all dissolved in an instant. Tommy ran toward him, tears streaming down her face, and Isaac opened his arms. He didn't need to say anything. He had already forgiven her. "I'm sorry, Dad," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I was so confused, but I never stopped loving you." Isaac smiled through his own tears. "I know, baby, I know." As they embraced, Isaac couldn't help but think about how far he had come. He had walked through hell and come out the other side, scarred but stronger. And now, with Tommy in his arms, he finally had the chance to rebuild everything. But even with the victory, Isaac knew that the journey wasn't over. The damage caused by his betrayal, the lies that had torn apart his family, couldn't be erased. But with time, with patience, they would heal. In the distance, Isaac could hear the faint sound of sirens. The last of Ramsey's men were being rounded up. And as he stood there, with Tommy in his arms and the sun setting on a new chapter of his life, Isaac knew that this was just the beginning. He had fought for justice, for redemption, and now he was finally free to live.